Welcome to Hard Talk with me, Zainab Badawi. Brexit is, of course, the biggest preoccupation for politicians here in Parliament in London. Well, now the opposition Labour Party has announced a new proposal. It wants Britain to have access to the EU single market whilst not actually being inside it. But even that does not go far enough for some Labour MPs. My guest is the prominent pro-EU campaigner, Labour MP Chuka Umunna. He wants Britain to be part of the EEA, that's the European Economic Area, just like Norway. But is he going against the spirit of Brexit whilst also being disloyal to his own party leadership? Chuka Umunna, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much for having me on.
This new amendment proposed by Labour would give Britain full access to the single market. Surely that is what you want. Why not back it?
Well, I will be voting for the Labour front bench amendment, as we call it here in Britain, but also voting for a cross-party amendment, which was supported by a number of the parties in our British House of Commons here, which sought to keep us in what is called the European Economic Area. And that is the only way you can have genuinely free access, be part of the framework of standards and rules that help consumers, the environment, employees. That's the only way to do it. So the intention behind the amendment is not a bad one, but you can't actually achieve the objectives unless you seek to keep Britain in the European Economic Area.
Let's just clarify this because it's quite complicated
Yes.
for a lot of people. You are saying that you will back this new amendment for Britain to have access to the single market proposed by the Labour Party leadership. You will.
I will, but my problem is it doesn't go nearly far enough, and in many respects it is a statement of government policy, and government policy is insufficient because any country, any of your viewers watching this around the world, any of your countries can access the single market through a free trade agreement with the European Union, but that is not the same as being part of the European Economic Area, which gives you full access and you participate in that framework of rules that protect everyday people.
You're going to do both then, but can you do both? Also back this cross-party amendment which was tabled in the House of Lords, one of the amendments coming before the House of Commons to be debated next week, which stipulates that Britain should be part of the European Economic Area, the EEA. You want to back that as well as the new amendment from Labour?
Yes.
But can you do both?
You can.
They're different.
They are different but not inconsistent. So the objectives set out in the Labour front bench amendment, the only way to achieve them are by means of the European Economic Area in the cross-party amendment. And so you can do both those things. And a very important thing, and I don't want to bore your viewers with the intricacies of all the drama.
No, don't give us too much
in
process.
our British House of Commons.
Yes.
But basically, unless you can put forward a piece of legislation or an amendment that commands support on both sides of the House, so not just the opposition, but some government MPs taking a different view to their government, then you can't get through. So the Labour proposition doesn't go through because no Conservative MP will support it. But
that's not what Labour's position is. Sir Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, says your backing of the House of Lords amendment on Britain being part of the EEA won't work because it is a pretence that everybody in the party is in the same place on it. He says there are very strong, very different views across the Parliamentary Labour Party on that particular amendment. So he is saying, put that one to one side, just back our one. Will you do that? Just back the Labour front bench's amendment?
It's not a question of whether I will vote for the Labour front bench's amendment. I've already said I will do that. It's a question of whether Conservative MPs will do so. And Conservative MPs are clear they won't back the Labour one, but they will back the cross-party amendment, which hasn't been put down by either front bench, to keep us in the European Economic Area. And such is the determination.
But do you know that for sure? I mean, you've got more than 260 Labour MPs in the House of Commons. That's a huge number.
13 Conservative members of Parliament have put down an amendment to an important piece of legislation, the trade bill, today, indicating that this is what they want. There are some people, but it is a small minority of people in the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, who won't support this. But that was the case in respect of other aspects of this bill where we've managed to succeed. So the bottom line is there are sufficient numbers of Conservative MPs who are prepared to rebel to offset however many Labour MPs...
Well, get them to back the new Labour amendment. Surely this is bigger than party politics.
It is.
If there's a real chance of 260 Labour MPs plus the Conservative rebels rebelling against their own government, then surely you should be, as a prominent Labour MP, be saying, look, things have shifted now with this new proposal by Labour. Come on board. This is bigger than party.
But it isn't a new proposal. It is a restatement of existing policy, and it is also exactly the same as the government's announced policy, which is full access to the internal market. That is what Theresa May set out in her Mansion House speech in the City of London earlier this year. It says it wants us to participate in EU agencies and have some involvement with their standards,
regulations, and institutions.
Which is what the Prime Minister Theresa May has said she wants as well.
She has not said she wants a customs union, and this Labour Party amendment says. No, well, they have said explicitly
that is a different,
whether it's that Britain would be part of the customs union.
That's a different amendment, and in fact, when it comes to Conservative MPs, a large number of them will support the customs union amendment. But the bottom line is, I wish that Conservative MPs would support Labour amendments. They've been very clear they won't do so. It's a big thing to defy your government. It's an even bigger thing to vote on an opposition amendment. But a cross-party amendment, where you've got a number of parties, it's not a party political thing, a number of parties putting forward a proposition they would be prepared to support. And, you know, I don't control what they do.
But it's a bit odd, though, that I think people would say that you're trying to do both. You're backing both.
But they're not inconsistent.
Okay, but let's look at what you want, and that's the EAA amendment, often referred to as the Norway model.
Yes.
But do you know what the Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg herself says about that, whether Britain should be a member of the EAA? She says she's got a pretty direct message for British politicians like you who want that continued EEA membership. She says Britain would have to maintain free movement of people and continue to accept rules made in Brussels. She asks, why should you leave the EU if you are accepting that?
Well, she does have a good point in the sense of my own view is, of course, it would be far better for the UK to stay in the European Union. But short of that, the best way of limiting the damage is for us to continue to participate in the EEA and the customs union. Now, in terms of...
But she says that won't work. It's not within the spirit.
Well, hang on just a minute. She may have said these things, but she's absolutely clear that her country would welcome the UK being part of the EEA, not least because she says it will increase the bargaining power of the EEA relative to the European Union.
That's a different question from what I was saying to you.
But let me deal. I was just about to come to your question precisely, which is with regard to free movement. In fact, the phrase is misleading because it suggests there is a free-for-all, and there isn't. You can better manage and impose greater restrictions, if that's what you wish to do, to the way freedom of movement operates as part of the European Economic Area and as part of the European Union. But Britain, the United Kingdom, chooses not to do so. For example, if somebody has been in our country for 3 months, they haven't secured work and they have no prospect of work, we could ask them to leave, but we choose not to do that. So you can actually address that issue within the EEA.
But it is quite clear that the EEA, as the Norwegian Prime Minister has said, I mean, another quote from her, she says, as a politician, I think it would be very difficult for the British to go that way after the referendum. She might, in theory, welcome it, but she says it's not possible, really, because it goes against the spirit of Brexit, and it does, doesn't it?
I don't believe it does. Let me explain to you.
The freedom of movement of people was something that is not accepted.
Let me answer that directly. The British people are asked in 2016 whether they wanted to leave or remain in the European Union, and essentially whether they wanted us to begin the process to withdraw from the European Union. The result was we wished to start the process to leave, and that is what Parliament did. Now the big question is whether you are able to deliver Brexit in the form that people thought they could get, which was basically have all the benefits of European Union membership, certainly economically, outside of it. That is not possible. Now, in terms of how the British people wanted us to leave, that was not on the ballot paper. Now, I don't deny that immigration wasn't an issue, but what I am saying is in terms of the balance and the weight that the British people choose to give to their concerns with immigration and whether they retain their jobs,
we don't know. But that was left to the politicians to decide. It was just in or out. And your party leader Jeremy Corbyn has said on numerous occasions explicitly, freedom of movement of people is not something I am going to accept. I mean, there's a question mark about whether freedom of movement of capital is going to be allowed under this new Labour Party amendment, freedom of movement of services and so on, but financial services, we know that freedom of movement of people is a non-starter for him. And under your suggestion, Britain remaining part of the European Economic Area, it would be.
That's right, but that is his view.
He's your party leader.
We are a democratic party. The overwhelming majority of our members, the overwhelming majority of our voters support us continuing to be part of the EEA, the single market, and the customs union. I don't think...
You don't know that, though. I mean...
We do. There have been numerous polls. There is another one that is due to come out this week. Numerous polls supporting that proposition. And actually, I think one of the reasons we haven't had a proper vote on this in the Labour Party is because people know what the results would be. I do not want to see the British
Keir Starmer has said it. There are plenty of MPs, Labour MPs, not to mention the party leader, who say freedom of movement is something we don't support because we know a lot of our constituents do not support it either.
But
and
as I
he
said,
says that is absolutely the case.
As I said, pure freedom of movement is not a requirement of the EEA. And let us be clear, I don't think people in my party want to see the British Labour Party echoing press releases from the British Conservative Party, or dare I say it, the UK Independence Party. They expect better from the party. That is not to deny that people don't have legitimate concerns about immigration. Of course they do. But if you implement the right policies, you can better manage it without completely adversely impacting on your economy. And we know from the government's own research that the areas that stand to be hit hardest from us leaving the single market and the customs union are precisely the Labour areas that we represent, in many of the areas that voted to leave in the highest numbers.
You mentioned this issue of immigration, and it's a difficult issue in many ways, but the former Conservative Party leader, current Conservative MP Ian Duncan Smith, has talked about this question of migration immigrants, and he says, with the UK being part of the EU, I quote, at present, a white Romanian job seeker faces far fewer obstacles to come to Britain than an Indian engineer or Brazilian dentist. But Brexit can mean fairness all round on the basis of meeting our own nation's requirements. So actually, as he states quite clearly there, a post-Brexit migration policy could actually let in more brown and black people into the UK than at present.
It couldn't.
So it's not about race.
That is a false prospectus being put forward by Ian Duncan Smith, because the Conservatives have a policy of reducing migration to the tens of thousands. Now, of course,
that may change, of course, under Sajid Javid, the new British Home Secretary, who has signalled possibly an easing of this.
What the new Home Secretary has said in the UK is that the hostile immigration policy announced by one of his predecessors, the Prime Minister, he will not press on with. But the requirement that immigration is reduced down to the tens of thousands not only requires a reduction in net immigration from the European Union, but also a drastic reduction in immigration from non-EU countries like India, Nigeria, etc. And actually, more immigration is coming to the UK from non-EU countries than EU countries. So unless Ian Duncan Smith is advocating dropping this commitment to the reducing immigration to the tens of thousands, he is misleading people.
You're a member of the group Open Britain, which is very staunchly Europhile, and you're also co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Europe. You want to see a referendum on any Brexit deal that may emerge. You want a kind of people's vote. What would the question on the ballot paper be?
Well, the reason for having a people's vote on the Brexit deal is because with every week that passes, new facts emerge. So your viewers who may have been watching the impact of Brexit on the Good Friday Agreement settlement in Northern Ireland will be scratching their heads and thinking, what on earth has the Good Friday Agreement got to do with Brexit? But all manner of things has turned out to be impacted by Brexit that we didn't know before, and that's why we should have a vote on the deal. My own preference, the campaign of which I'm part, the People's Vote campaign, hasn't stipulated the exact question. We want to win the argument. That
it's got to be a yes or no question.
Of course, and I would suggest it would be leave with the Prime Minister's deal, or stay in and argue for reform as part of the European Union. But that's my personal preference, but that is what would be on offer. And actually,
Can I just ask you then,
please,
though, That's what would be on offer. Accept the Prime Minister's deal.
I don't get to. I wish I was running Parliament.
It's going to be so complex, isn't it? People are going to have to sit down and think the Prime Minister's deal. What does it tell us about the customs union?
Yes.
What does it tell us about free movement of capital, people, and all the rest of it?
Well, I think we've got to.
That is so complex, isn't it, for people
Zainab,
to try and get their head around a yes or no?
We've got to be careful. Let's not patronise
No, I'm not
the
patronising.
British people. They are more than capable of understanding what this deal entails. And the big
Oh, really? Because there are people, Remainers like you, who said we got into trouble with a simple yes or no on whether Britain should stay part of the EU because you were trying to reduce to a simple answer something which was highly complex, as we can now see.
But the big difference is, in many respects, we are now having the debate we should have had a long time ago. But the big difference is, you have two fixed propositions. I mean, the truth of the matter is, when this whole process kicked off, we were all speculating. It was a hypothetical debate about what would and wouldn't happen. And, you had people like the British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson saying, because the French want to sell us brie, the Germans cars, and the Italians Prosecco, they're going to give us everything that we want and absolve us from all the obligations of having the benefits of the single market or whatever it may be. We now know the facts. And you've got the actual fixed proposition of what out looks like. We didn't know that. And we obviously already know what being a member of the European looks like at this moment in time. I think that is the big difference.
Suppose that deal, hypothetically, is actually the best deal that the House of Commons can come up with, because the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, said in December that parliamentarians would play a major role in the Brexit negotiations. There cannot be any doubt that Parliament will be intimately involved at every stage.
Because the government was forced into that
by
backbenchers.
All right, so therefore, if there is that on the table and you're thrashing things out and there is this deal and it's a good one and you like it, what happens if the voters then reject it?
If Parliament rejects the deal.
If the voters in the referendum reject the deal on offer, even though actually, arguably, it's a good one that's been debated and agreed by parliamentarians.
If the people reject the deal,
yes,
then there's a bit of a contradiction in saying it's a good one, because they will have come to the view that this deal isn't good enough and it's not worth it.
But that may be something that they've decided because they've not looked at the ins and outs of it.
But we can't go down this road of patronising British voters again.
All right, so you would accept it if they said no, but it's a deal that you would go and...
I think, look,
what would happen? Britain would crash out of the EU
I don't think anybody would like to see that happen.
But it could happen.
But in the end, if the British public determine that we should accept whatever deal the Prime Minister comes back with, notwithstanding whatever negative impact I or others may think it may have on our country, then we will leave the European Union. But going back to the question, as I said, my preferred question, and we don't live in a dictatorship at Chuka Umunna, but my preferred question would be leave with the deal or remain.
But Remain is not an option, as you know, because Britain has voted for Brexit, and we know that the government has said if there's no deal, it would crash out. It's making...
But it can't do that.
Well, I mean...
It can't do that. I tell you why it can't do that. Because Parliament has secured for itself a meaningful vote on the way that we withdraw from the European Union, which covers all aspects.
But they could suspend.
They would not be able to crash the UK
or have
out.
A transition.
The government is not able to, legislatively not least, crash out without Parliament agreeing in the affirmative to leave without a deal. So this is the big difference. I think a lot when I speak to European foreign ministers and heads of government that people are finally, I think, beginning to get is that because of the parliamentary arithmetic in the UK Parliament, although you're negotiating with the UK government, they currently have a negotiating position for which they don't know they have support in our Parliament. And that makes it very difficult for our European partners.
At the end of the day, you said you don't crash out, you accept the deal or you remain. Isn't that really the crux of the issue for you, Chuka Umunna? You just want to stop Brexit.
Hey, I've been absolutely honest about that. I'd love to stop Brexit.
But you
I'd love to see it. But how
you voted for Article 50, which triggered the process of exiting the EU.
I shall explain why, but I'm really clear. Like, people always think this is like some revelation that I want to stop Brexit. Of course I want to stop Brexit, but I don't
people voted for Brexit.
I don't get to decide. Like I said, it's not a dictatorship of Chuka Umunna. It's about the people. And if the people determine that they don't want to accept this deal, but they'd rather change our country whilst being a member of the European Union, that is up to them.
You're the grandson of a High Court judge, privately educated, city lawyer. Are you not part of that metropolitan elite, which is really a bit out of touch
Well, look,
of what people out there really think?
I simply represent my constituency. I was born in the South London constituency of Streatham. We are one of the most, our local authority area is one of the most deprived local authority areas in England. 1 in 4 people lives in poverty. Over half of our residents cannot afford to buy their own home, and we have some of the biggest social problems in Britain, and yet we scored the highest Remain vote. And it is not because my constituents are some out-of-touch elite. It is because we have many problems. We don't believe leaving the European Union should solve it. And, you know, my grandfather fought for this country. He served our country. He prosecuted the Nazis at Nuremberg. He was part of our intelligence services. I don't think he would have wanted us to become some kind of isolationist, go-it-alone country that lacks self-confidence on the world stage.
Isolationist, go-it-alone country. Is that the vision you think that Jeremy Corbyn, your Labour Party leader, has for Britain?
I'm not sure precisely what his vision is for us vis-à-vis Europe. I think that the views of many on the left of the political spectrum in the UK towards the European Union are not accurate. I think they're slightly anachronistic. It is seen, for example, as a kind of neoliberal capitalist club. You hear that people say that about the European Union. I think Pedro Sanchez, the new Prime Minister in Spain, our Swedish Social Democratic sister party, and Syriza in Greece would have something to say about being described as neoliberal.
Because he wants state subsidies and nationalisation and
we've just,
kind of
do you know what?
Anti-capitalism. So he's got the wrong vision then.
We've just nationalised one of our train lines in this country whilst being part of the European Union.
But
my
you don't get on with the leadership. That's my point. I mean, you've recently had this spat about the unpaid political student politics internship in your office, and what you told Politics Home website, you said the Labour Party leadership briefed against me on this for political reasons, and our policy is to ban unpaid internships, not unpaid student placements. So making it quite clear there's a difference between student placements and so on. So why didn't the Labour Party leadership briefed against you?
Well, you'll have to ask them that.
Why do you think that? You wouldn't have said that if you didn't have an idea.
But they very clearly... Well, look, I think there is, you know, traditionally speaking, in the UK, we've got a first-past-the-post electoral system, which I think we should scrap. I'd rather have a system of proportional representation, which is more democratic, it's more fair. But with this system, it is a two-party system, rigged in favour of two parties, and that necessitates those parties being broad coalitions of where they sit on the spectrum. And there is a open debate as to whether, in both the parties actually, whether they continue being broad coalitions, bringing in, say, in the Labour Party, Social Democrats, Keynesians like myself,
centrists such as you,
and people who would, you know, come from a Marxist tradition. Now, I don't have a problem with that, but some do. And some want
including Jeremy Corbyn, you think he has a problem with centrists
some of those around him and some of our membership, many of whom we've had a huge influx of members since he became the leader, which is a good thing. But some of them don't think that people who sit in my social democratic place on the centre-left have a place in the Labour Party.
Briefly, sticking with the Labour Party, in 2015 you flirted for 3 days with the idea of running as leader. You changed your mind. Some people thought that was a bit flaky of you. But would you stand as leader? You've been talked about as the black Tony Blair, as Britain's answer to Barack Obama.
I'm stressed with Chuka Umunna. I'm fine with that. And would you? There's no vacancy in the Labour Party leadership.
If there were.
And nor will there be, or there should be, in the near future. And
should be in the... Would you like to see Jeremy Corbyn stand in the next general election as Labour leader?
Well, I don't get to determine that. I think the membership are very clear that he should be the candidate in the next general election, and I certainly am not arguing for anything different. I think it's highly unlikely I shall become the leader of the Labour Party anytime soon or ever for that fact. But anyway,
you could stand.
But it's not about me, really. I'm in this because I'm trying to change my country and change the world. And if you're not in politics for that reason, get out.
Chuka Umunna, thank you very much
for coming on Hard
Talk.
Thanks for having me on. Loved it.